it's easy to ignore your customers at times when revenue is dropping and you really want to go after new prospects, but don't forget about your existing customers and tell them the story of how you're going to be there for them.
This is the Storytelling for Sales podcast, a show about leveraging the power of storytelling to ignite your sales performance and grow your business.
Well, hello and welcome back. I'm your host, Executive Coach Ed Bilat, and thank you for listening to our show. Let's face it, it's been tough 8 weeks for everybody. This coronavirus situation has changed everything. Sellers are working from home, prospects and customers are working from home, and even when the restrictions are lifted, business travel and office visits might never go back the way they used to. Just 5 minutes ago, I just read that Shopify is digital by default company now, and they will keep their offices closed until 2021. And after that, most of the people will permanently work remotely. So how do you prospect? How do you do your discovery meetings? How do you close? And how do you lead your sales teams to success in this remote selling environment? There is so much distraction out there, it's almost unbelievable. How easy does it seem now to put your sales targets aside? Very much so. The focus has definitely changed. So 2 things I want to mention here. Even with everything going on in the world, remember, it's not the time to stop selling. It's not the time just say, hey, nobody's buying anyway, and just sit back until things get back to normal. And second, under no circumstances allow anyone to make you feel guilty for continuing to sell your product during this time. You have a responsibility to your family, your employees, and your customers to do everything in your power to provide and lead. It's your job to continue to do so, especially at the time of crisis. And today we have a very interesting and intriguing guest for you to talk about the changes we're seeing in sales, sales strategy, and sales leadership. Steve Benson is the founder and CEO of Maps, the number 1 route planner for field salespeople, is joining us from California. Steve has actually been on our podcast about a year and a half ago, and now he's returning back with a new perspective to share. Steve Benson, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, absolutely. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have you with us and to have you back. It's been a year and a half since the last time we spoke. Obviously, a lot of things have changed, and the elephant is in the room. So COVID-19 is here. So we certainly got to address the current situation, which is on top of the mind for many of buyers and sellers, obviously. So if you remember last time we spoke, we kind of broke our conversation in 3 circles about the sales, technology, and the leadership, these 3 things. So I thought, what if we go through the same 3 areas, but now we're going to look at them through the lenses of COVID-19 situation. How does this sound?
Sounds fantastic.
Okay, in that case, we shall start with sales, because this is Storytelling for Sales podcast. So obviously, Steve, you've been in sales for many years. So IBM, HP, Google, and currently the founder of Maps for 8 years now. You host your own Outside the Sales podcast, which is very unusual for a CEO to host a podcast. And I listen to that because you have a lot of sales royalty attending the podcast as guests. So wonderful job there. Yeah, so there's a truly big names who come as guests. I also love your Maps videos on training, which you provide. So in terms of adapting to the new sales culture over this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, what type of sales strategies that need to be changed based on the way you need to sell now?
Well, I think that the whole situation changes things in a lot of ways because there are just a bunch of headwinds to what you're going to encounter as a salesperson that you weren't going to encounter before. One, you can't necessarily meet with people face-to-face, which tends to extend sales cycles, take away your ability to kind of help move things down the path on the sales cycle effectively. In general, there's a lot of uncertainty around people's budgets. People aren't necessarily buying and doing new things because they're just trying to keep the wheels on. And there's a lot of wait and see behavior going on out there. So How do you change that? I think you have to come back to a lot of the basics and make sure you're doing what selling has always been in a lot of ways. You have to focus on those relationships. You have to leverage your sponsors. You need the person who, within the organization, be your eyes and ears more than ever before, because it's harder to herd the cats like the way you need to do in sales. If you're remote and not able to kind of corral everyone into a room, it's different to hold people's attention if you're doing it over a Zoom than you can in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with your sponsors, you have to make sure that you're uncovering objections that you're not getting, talking to your sponsor before larger Zoom meetings so that they can figure out what the objections other people in the organization may have, what things are out there so you'll know to address them. And then that way you can enter these strange environments called Zoom meetings with a little more ammo behind you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before you even get to a Zoom meeting, like how do you actually formulate good reasons why a buyer should be talking with us now? Because in the sales world, we're always looking for that. What is the reason for my call? And when you're calling them, the first thing you say, hey, thank you for taking my call. The reason for my call is. So what is this reason? How do you formulate it? So that's a question that keeps popping up.
Yeah, I think it's harder to get people's attention right now. You have to be classic consultative selling, mapping to their problems. You have to understand their problems to even get the meeting and get their attention in the first place. You have to show them in some way that you understand their problems and can help them in this current situation. It's a tough time to get people to do new things necessarily. There's just that many more headwinds to that sort of thing. A lot of the initiatives that sellers tend to sell, I think mapping things to saving money is better than mapping things towards growth or winning more revenue right now. A lot of people are concerned with having enough revenue to pay salaries of their employees, and a lot of decision makers at companies are really just trying to keep the wheels on their bus. So it's a great time to show how you can help them save money, how you can help them do more with less. And so your messaging should be around that as opposed to help you grow a ton this year or something like that. You really have to be careful about being adjusted for the times and having the things that you say adjusted appropriately for the messages that are going to resonate with them the most in these times.
That's right. So like empathy is huge, and it's probably one of the most important questions is how do you stay empathetic? Because a lot of people, they're saying, okay, I just don't want to look insensitive in this crisis. Therefore, I'm not going to sell anything. It's just not human to do that, right? So like empathy is a huge part to overcome this.
Absolutely, yeah. When you're in a leadership position in a crisis of this nature, so trying to put yourself in your customer's shoes, you're trying to provide, first and foremost, safety and security to your employees, right?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
That's what my focus is right now. That's what I think probably a lot of the people that a salesperson is selling to right now, that's what their main focus is. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're approaching them. As a business leader, you're responsible for literally the base layer of your employees' pyramid of needs, right? The money they pay for food for their home, their healthcare, their long-term financial security, their short-term financial security, which is probably more on their minds these days.
For sure.
And not to mention, you're also responsible ultimately for higher things up, like are they enjoying their life, their wants as opposed to just the needs. But right now, I think people are focused on maintaining the provision of needs for their employees and keeping as many of their employees as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of the first thing they're looking at. So that's the thing that I would keep in mind there.
Yeah, like, so are you okay? Like, we're here to support you. Are you okay? So that's like a normal human message to reach out. And I think that would resonate really well versus just, hey, we're going to increase your revenue by 200% this year.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about the technology. So obviously you've been in the technology field for a long time, IBM, Google, HP, and you stayed there. So in terms of badge maps, like, have you guys changed anything technologically? Have you changed your marketing message in terms of the crisis?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, we're obviously in a unique position because Badger Maps is an application for specifically field salespeople, outside salespeople, when they're going out into the field to meet with customers. The types of things that we help with, in a lot of ways, are a lot less relevant in a Zoom-based world that we're in temporarily here, right? So I guess the way we've shifted our messaging is towards customers and companies that are doing really well right now or have new needs for our products and services right now. So historically it's been field salespeople only. Now we're helping food delivery, like meal delivery type companies deliver meals to vulnerable people. We're helping doctors and healthcare organizations do home healthcare type visits because there are fundamental problems of prioritization, scheduling, routing. When they go out in the field is very similar to the problems that a field salesperson would have. Capturing the right data, figuring out different rates at which to visit people.
That's right. I love that point. I love that point absolutely because we talk a lot about the storytelling and storytelling libraries where you can share like specific stories which are going to resonate with your customers. So you just brought a very important point here. Because the stories are similar, it's easier to understand and relate to them because you are in a similar world. Like, hey guys, we're not just here to sell our product, we actually understand the pain you go through. And I'm not just saying this because we do live in this environment as well. So I absolutely like that point you're saying. And in terms of leading the team, what kind of challenges do you see facing sales leaders specifically? What are your daily challenges?
Well, daily challenges are it's harder to communicate. The salespeople are having a harder time accomplishing things. There are headwinds to accomplishing what you need to accomplish. I think sometimes you have to shift your strategy right now, just like we were mentioning how Badger has shifted its strategy. I think you need to maybe change the way you were doing things. Some of it's by force, right? If you have gone to market with an outside sales team and now all of a sudden you have to go to market over Zoom, that's a big strategy change and maybe not optimized for your business, which is why you had a field sales team to be successful in the first place. Now you have to do it this other way, and it's just going to extend sales cycles, and it's going to be a more challenging way for you to do it until you can go back outside. Maybe you have to target different customer groups in this environment. It's hard to hold your reps accountable for their quotas, for example, given the way the world has shifted. So no one's going to make their number in Q2, obviously. For the most part, people are getting killed out there. But how do you adjust the year? How do you adjust their compensation? Especially when maybe money is tight. So that's something that a manager needs to think about right now. Managers need to think about resizing their team. Maybe they're dealing with having less money available and they need to cut costs and they have to make decisions around, well, if the CEO tells the VP of sales, hey, you got to make the team 20% cheaper, you decide how to do it. You're left figuring out, well, do I fire 20% of the people? Or furlough them? Do I lower everyone's salary by 20%? If so, do I lower their commission or their base?
Oh, the base, yes.
Or some kind of mix between those things. Maybe do I fire 10% of the people and lower everyone else's base salary by 20%, and that gets me to my overall 20% number. I would recommend first looking, are there people that aren't great on the team? And don't forget that now's a great time to hire new people. We've been in a terrible sales hiring environment for years right now, and suddenly there's a ton of great people available out there. So if there was weaknesses in your team, it's not a bad time to make some changes, bring in different people.
Let's talk about that. So as a sales manager, as a sales leader, so you cannot meet with your team right now the way you used to.
Right.
And if you're hiring a bunch of people. So what's the best strategy to approach training and coaching in this environment? How do you actually train people, like new people you just mentioned?
Well, I think you need a really solid plan if you're bringing on a brand new person, because bringing someone on remotely, when you've historically done it in person or at headquarters, there's a lot of things that just worked and were in place. You've got to make sure you're doing all those things remotely. I think you need more interaction than you normally would. You need to get the team involved in ways that you probably historically didn't to make an onboarding successful.
Okay.
In general, in terms of coaching and managing your overall team, not just a new person, but as a more general rule, in a changing time, you want to listen to the base of the company, basically. Meaning, you want to hear from the boots on the ground. There's a great quote from General Stan McChrystal on this, about boots on the ground knowledge. He was American general in Afghanistan, and he talks about his style of leadership because in times of uncertainty and change and you don't know everything going on out there, you have to push power down. The boots on the ground, they have to be able to make decisions. And the way I would leverage that as a sales manager is you want to make your best reps your coaches for your other people. And when they figure something out, when someone figures out a new way to sell successfully in this environment, maybe a certain type of customer who's purchasing, or a way to make the sales cycle shorter, or a way to communicate value in this environment. You want to have them teach everyone else how they did it. It's very credible to have your sales reps teaching other sales reps. It helps. And you're not going to know as a sales leader how to do everything right now because it's a changing time. It's a new world. And all these people who are out there on the street on your team, they can gather this information. So you want to empower them to train the rest of the team.
I absolutely love this point. So just empower the team members to help each other.
So have a ton of one-on-one meetings, right? And figure out, ask them what's working, what's not working. When a deal does go through, put it under a microscope and find out why they were successful. Talk to that rep. And then your next group meeting, have that rep teach the other people on the team, here's what I did to win this deal. Here was what I figured out. That can be a really powerful strategy.
Yeah, no, I love it. So thank you. Just taking a look at the environment Wayne. So sellers are working from home, prospects and customers are working from home. And even when the restrictions are lifted, so then business travel and office visits might never return back to normal the way it used to be. So as a leader, how do you lead your sales team? How do you take them to succeed in this remote selling environment?
Well, I think we've talked about some of the things, tweaking the strategy and things like that, changing who you're necessarily selling to, coaching them better. I think focus on coaching, focus on daily huddles in this environment. So do 1 or even 2 daily 10-minute huddles with your whole team to kind of keep that team talking to each other, keep them communicating with each other, keep morale high. It's hard to motivate people in this environment. You need to be much more mobile and responsive in this environment, and you really have to listen to what's going on out there. Depending on your industry, it can just be a really tough situation. It's possible that as a sales management, you need to cut costs or downsize. If you're there, I'd say try to avoid cutting people's incentive to do new deals as a sales leader. You want to make sure if you're going to cut some people's salaries, you want to cut on the base side, not the bonus side, and make sure they understand it's temporary. Consider saying, okay, well, we're only working 4 days a week because we cut salary 30%. And in those types of circumstances, there's often less work to do. That being said, you need to prospect. You need to go on the offensive. You need to really work to build out that pipeline because this is going to be a tough time. But when the world starts again, people will take action. So I think a lot of people are kind of experiencing an extension of their sales cycles right now. But then once the world turns back on, things will click over.
Yeah, and which is a great advice and strategy. Just last week, one of my customers actually shared what they've done, and I think it's pretty cool. They took the 5 existing customers and had a mastermind, so like a 45 Zoom meeting. They invited 5 key customers, and then CEO of their company came to that meeting as well. And they spent that hour talking about the key priorities, what's changing, what's on their mind. No sales pitch, no call to action, just a simple human conversation, right? Which was very, very valuable. And it's a great way to stay in touch and to show people that you actually care about them. The second phase of that project was they reached out to new prospects and they say, hey, listen, we just had this conversation with our 5 key customers and this is what they're telling us. Like, this is what's happening. Like, is this relevant in your world? Could we talk about this as well? And that worked probably better of any strategies they had before. So because it's a human, first of all, and it's also a smart way to reach out. This is not sales pitch, it's a human interaction. And what you just said, I think, works really well with that type of approach. So thank you. So we're getting toward the end of our podcast. So I'm going to ask you a traditional question. And we talked a little bit about the storytelling. In these times of change, in this moment of time, what does the art of storytelling mean to you?
Well, I think storytelling is such an important part of communicating overall. And in these times, it's important to tell your story in a really candid way and be open with your customers. Communicate more with them than you otherwise would to keep that trust and let them know that you're going to be there and be able to support them in these difficult times. So turning towards your customers to give them extra support. It's easy to ignore your customers at times when revenue is dropping and you really want to go after new prospects. But don't forget about your existing customers and tell them the story of how you're going to be there for them. How you're there for other customers, tell them that story and then to find out if that's something that they need.
Great. So thank you so much for that. And the last question for today, what's the best way to contact you for our listeners?
Well, I mean, if it's Badger Maps that you're interested in because you're in field sales, our website's the best way to contact us. So just Google Badger Maps or just go to the website is badgermapping.com. If you're looking to contact me directly, LinkedIn's always the best way to go. Just search Steve Benson, Badger Maps. That's usually the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay, great. Thank you again so much for coming to our podcast for the second time. So there was tons of great ideas here, and I saw a couple of true golden nuggets here. So thank you again. Let's stay in touch, and we'll talk to you again.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
That does it for this episode of Storytelling for Sales. You'll find show notes and links on our webpage, storytellingsales.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.